He stands before us, a symbol of evil. But much of Hitler's life has remained shrouded in mystery.
Hitler represents the mystery that we have to keep pursuing.
Now, medical detectives offer a new view. A Führer addicted to drugs. And a fatal disease that may have quickened Germany's defeat.
There is no question that he has Parkinson's.
This is the story of Hitler's medical secret. Many consider Hitler as the most evil and ruthless tyrant to ever live. His record is chilling. 6 million Jews, 3 million Soviet prisoners, hundreds of thousands of gypsies, homosexuals, and the disabled, all exterminated. He led Germany into a destructive world war that would leave millions more dead and displaced. 60 years later, medical detectives are still trying to unravel the secrets behind Hitler's rise and fall. Their goal is not to explain Hitler's behavior, but to expose a carefully concealed medical profile that may have helped influence the course of history. The search for clues leads back to 1889, with Hitler's birth in Braunau, Austria. The medical investigator's first question is, does Hitler's youth offer insights into what shaped his fanatical views? Hitler was a weak, frail newborn. His father, Alois, was stern and domineering. His mother, Clara, was a depressive and sought solace in her boy, Adolf.
We know that Hitler grew up very close to his mother. The family physician said it was the closest mother-son relationship he had ever seen.
In January 1907, Hitler's mother, Clara, was diagnosed with breast cancer. She had the standard treatment at the time, a mastectomy. Historian Rudolf Binion searches for clues about this period of Hitler's life. He finds the medical records of Clara's Jewish doctor, Edward Bloch. These records indicate that a 17-year-old Hitler persuaded Dr. Bloch to try a radical and unproven treatment. High doses of a harsh disinfectant called iodoform. It burns the skin, causes vomiting and hallucinations. It was both useless and extremely painful.
We can follow Adolf Hitler day by day through the treatment of his mother. We can see him going through this torment as she's systemically poisoned ultimately by the cumulative effect of overdoses of iodoform. Ultimately, she dies on the 21st of December.
Ravaged by guilt for causing his mother so much agony, a young Hitler harbors deep anger for the Jewish doctor. Anger that would manifest itself into virulent anti-Semitism. Historian Rudolf Binion is on the search for long-lost clues about Adolf Hitler's troubled past. Ravaged by Gild's mother's death, the 17-year-old Hitler, instead of blaming himself, unconsciously raged against the family's Jewish doctor. Binion believes that this is the root of Hitler's anti-Semitism.
His rhetoric was suspicious because it was always the Jewish poisoner, the Jewish cancer, the Jewish profiteer. It pointed back to his mother's terminal treatment by a Jewish doctor, which was ultimately a disaster. He had it in for the Jewish doctor and projected it onto the Jew.
Rudolf Binion, a psychohistorian, believes that Hitler's close and tormented relationship with his mother may throw his sexual identity into crisis. According to classic Freudian psychology, it may carry major implications for the development of his future sex life.
I found no serious indication of any active sex life in his adulthood. It seems like a stunted development of a mama's boy who was very much erratically enthralled by his mother, who was attached to her and could not detach himself from her.
In 1908, soon after his mother's death, medical detectives track Hitler to Vienna, where he strived to become an artist. These paintings show his impressions of the city. Viennese society was sexually permissive, and yet Hitler reportedly shunned women. After 5 years in Vienna, there's no evidence Hitler ever had a sexual relationship with a woman, though some historians suspect he may have been secretly involved with men.
He's very hard to track during this period. At one point, he stayed in a men's shelter, and there's some speculation that this men's shelter was a hotbed of male prostitution. And there's been some speculation that Hitler got involved in this.
In 1914, a 25-year-old Hitler left Vienna to fight in World War I. Allegations of homosexuality followed him into the trenches. A fellow soldier alleged that he witnessed Hitler performing sex acts with other soldiers. Hitler's homosexuality remains uncorroborated, but some psychologists believe his desire to suppress his own impulses may be at the root of his later persecution of homosexuals. In 1918, the war ended in a humbling defeat and crippling peace treaty. Germany would be racked by unemployment and hyperinflation. Hitler, now 29 years old, joined what would become the Nazi Party and began preaching nationalism and anti-Semitism.
Besteigen unsere Jacke zum Symbol des deutschen Volkes und Reiches erhoben.
As chief spokesman for the Nazi Party, Hitler's fame grew, yet he remained single and probably celibate. Then, in 1927, at the age of 37, Hitler began the most mysterious liaison of his life. Her name was Geli Raubal. At 18, she was half his age. Even stranger, she was his own niece. But Hitler was reportedly at ease with her, as with no one else.
Hitler liked to squire her around in his Mercedes touring the countryside. Was she his date or was she his half-niece? It's like so much about Hitler, it was ambiguous.
Gelli soon moved into Hitler's Munich apartment, but it was unclear what their sex life, if any, was like. Over their 5-year relationship, they kept separate bedrooms, but controversial statements collected by American intelligence indicated that Hitler was forcing Gelli to participate in bizarre sadomasochistic practices. But was this just propaganda? On September the 18th, 1931, Gelli was found lying on the floor of her bedroom in a pool of blood, shot in the chest. The gun belonged to Hitler. Gelli was just 23 years old. Why Gelli died remains a mystery. However, what is known is Hitler entered a deep depression. And to the medical detectives, Gelli's death signaled the end of Hitler's attempts at anything resembling a conventional relationship.
Gelli was Hitler's last chance at normalcy. That here is this woman who seemed to be fairly uninhibited, and Hitler had a shot at being normal. And that the way it ended marked a turning point for Hitler. From then on, 1931 on, we see Hitler at his most monstrous.
After Gelli's death, Hitler started to act out his sadomasochistic tendencies on the world stage. And he channeled all his energy into politics. Hitler failed with women, and possibly men too. But it seems he had finally found a relationship, an obsessive affair with political power. The passion can be heard in his frequent speeches. Medical detectives have found a bizarre confirmation that for Hitler, politics replaced sex. He became sexually aroused by his own voice.
Hitler told 2 of his physicians that during his speeches he had orgasms, and this embarrassed him, and he asked them to give him some remedy so that he wouldn't have orgasms or even sexual excitement during his speeches. And they advised him to leave things as they were, because if he got rid of this sexual excitement, he would lose the power of his oratory.
This was his sex life. It was all projected. It was all onto Germany. It was all sublimated with a vengeance.
Hitler was seducing the German people. Millions succumbed to the power of his oratory.
When you see the newsreels, apparently they don't come close to capturing the effect of seeing Hitler in person. In person, people would faint, people would talk about it as if they were swooning erotically, women would, and men sometimes even.
But Hitler himself admitted he had little interest in women. He famously declared, "My bride is Germany." Hitler's sociopathic personality was now firmly formed. His sadistic tendencies, his anti-Semitism, all channeled towards power and politics. It is a frightening mixture that would ignite World War II and the Holocaust, bringing unimaginable death and destruction to Europe. By 1935, Adolf Hitler was now firmly in control of Germany.
Dauerung dieser Kräfte
He passed the Nuremberg laws, banning intermarriage with Jews and effectively depriving them of any political rights. He soon made his first military move, reoccupying the west bank of the Rhine and breaking the Treaty of Versailles. It was around this time Hitler came under the care of an eccentric doctor named Theo Morell. Morell injected the Führer with his own secret concoction. In the coming years, Hitler became one of the most successful military commanders of all time. Now a medical detective tries to determine exactly what was in those injections and how this affected Hitler's strategic thinking. This medical investigation began when Leonard Heston became fascinated by Hitler's health.
I didn't know what was wrong with him. Here was obviously an ill man, and I couldn't figure it out. And I became puzzled by Hitler's medical state. I couldn't make a diagnosis.
What puzzled Heston most was Hitler's radical change in behavior. The Führer starts out as a careful and deliberate strategist. But later his decisions became impulsive. His rage is uncontrollable. And, weirdest of all, it was often euphoric, even in the worst of times. Heston began an investigation into the cause of Hitler's severe mood changes and found out that Hitler was obsessed with disease. He was phobic about cancer, perhaps because of his mother's death. And he preferred natural and unconventional medicine.
It's important to emphasize how obsessed Hitler was with health, with the purity of the body as a reflection of the purity of the nation. And it was very much a rhetoric of the body. All of his rhetoric is about this cleansing, eliminating anything that departs from this idealized nation.
Heston's investigation leads him to Dr. Theo Morell, whose speciality was treating aristocrats and celebrities. In 1936, Morell began treating Germany's most famous celebrity. For years, Hitler had been plagued by digestive problems. He had embarrassing flatulence and severe pain that Heston believes is the result of gallstones. Morell prescribed an unorthodox treatment: capsules filled with living bacteria cultured from the feces of a Bulgarian peasant. Though the treatment remained unproven, Hitler was delighted with the results. Over the next few years, Morell added treatment after treatment, countless drugs to relieve digestive problems, to dull pain, overcome insomnia, and even leeches to remove blood. Then, at around 1941, Morell began injecting Hitler with one of his strange concoctions. Morell claimed it was vitamins. Heston tracked down and questioned a surviving eyewitness to the injections, Hitler's valet, Heinz Linger.
Linger's answer was, well, he became fresh, he energized. He was ready to face the day and go out and conduct the war. And it was immediate. The needle was still in the arm, and Hitler showed this alertness. It was something that didn't square up medically, an intravenous injection of vitamins. It just makes no sense whatsoever.
This discovery led Heston onto a hunt to find out what was in these mysterious injections. At the National Archives, he found 35 rolls of microfilm. These are the medical records of Dr. Morell. He examined them closely, yet they do not reveal the secret. Then Heston tracked down a curious doctor who during the war secretly analysed Morell's preparation. The results were so damaging that Hitler's second-in-command, Heinrich Himmler, had the laboratory report destroyed. For it showed that Hitler was taking methamphetamine. Adolf Hitler was addicted to speed. With the shock finding that Adolf Hitler was addicted to amphetamines, medical detectives have turned their search onto the German army as a whole. The German military was known to use amphetamines, more commonly called speed. Amphetamines boost the level of dopamine and norepinephrine in the brain. They increase alertness and confidence, as well as hostility and aggression. They can even cause psychosis. Nazi stormtroopers took amphetamines to run farther, Luftwaffe pilots to stay awake, and the Führer himself may have used these drugs to gain an upper hand. Based on the newly discovered medical records, psychiatrist Leonard Heston concludes that the Führer began taking speed in pill form in the late 1930s. This was a period when Hitler was making daring and intimidating diplomatic moves. He absorbed Austria into Germany, then annexed part of Czechoslovakia, all without firing a shot.
I think his very aggressive diplomacy, where he dominated European politics, it's hard for me to see him doing, unless perhaps even at that early time he was preparing for his conferences with a little bit of oral amphetamine.
Hitler's boldness continued, but now it was military boldness. In September 1939, he invaded Poland. His strategy was the Blitzkrieg, or lightning war, a deadly combination of surprise, speed, and highly focused attacks. Over the next months, Nazi forces swept through Western Europe in a firestorm of conquest. But in June 1941, Hitler made his biggest blunder. He launched a massive invasion of Russia, opening up a second front. It is by most accounts a baffling strategic decision, but according to Heston's theory, just the kind of reckless thinking brought on by amphetamine use. At first, the Germans met with success, but eventually the Soviets repelled the Nazis. They stalled the Germans until the fierce Russian winter set in. Now, for the first time, Hitler was feeling the heavy stress of war. It's at this point that Heston believes Dr. Morell switched from pills to injections of speed.
If you need constant state of stimulation over a period of time, as I think probably Hitler needed before Moscow, then you have to take it much more frequently. And he got injections as the war went on when bad news came in.
It's likely that Hitler would have become tolerant to the drug, needing ever more injections to have the same effect. But too much speed produces toxic effects.
At least from Stalingrad onward. He bit at the skin around his nails. Linga said it was his most characteristic gesture. It is something that's seen with toxic amphetamine users. I've never seen it anyplace else. So I think it's quite important.
Rage can also be a side effect of amphetamine use. Hitler's rages were growing out of control. Even the head of the Gestapo, Heinrich Himmler, began calling his behavior bizarre. Amphetamine abuse could even be affecting Hitler's thought processes.
When you reach a toxic stage, thinking becomes stilted and lacking in original elements. It lacks the flexibility to come up with alternative courses of action. These are all descriptions of Hitler that occur at the time. And this was extremely detrimental.
By 1943, Hitler's invasion of Russia had imploded. Two German armies were encircled, trapped by a bitter winter and Soviet artillery. Hitler's generals advocated surrender, but possibly due in part to amphetamine abuse, he remained inflexible. Hitler insisted on a no-retreat policy, forcing his men to fight and sending tens of thousands of his troops to die. Eventually, the surrender at Stalingrad was inevitable. It was one of Hitler's first major defeats, and a crack widened in the once invincible German army. To Dr. Leonard Heston, a doctor and his drug may have changed the course of history. And his discovery provides a unique window into Hitler's behavior. Amphetamines may have made Hitler aggressive in the beginning and reckless in the end. But it was a disease, not a drug, that may have been Hitler's ultimate downfall. (1940). With uncanny military prowess and fueled by amphetamines, Hitler pushed through Western Europe. Nazi troops overran Norway, Denmark, Holland, Belgium, and finally captured the greatest prize of all, France. And yet something stopped Hitler's conquest in its tracks. Now a medical detective has developed a new theory. What drove Hitler to defeat was a fatal illness. Hitler lost the war in part because he was ravaged by disease. The story begins in Brooklyn, where an American schoolboy was fascinated by the evils of Nazi Germany.
When I was growing up, Hitler in Brooklyn was the devil. It occurred to me, why did this man want to kill me? Why did he want to kill all the Jews? I became obsessed with Germany and Hitler.
Lieberman's obsession with Hitler followed him through college and medical school. It stayed with him as he became a leading expert in Parkinson's disease. In 1992, Dr. Lieberman heard about an extraordinary newsreel of Hitler. The Führer had always managed his image zealously. He suppressed anything that might show a sign of weakness, but the following footage somehow escaped the German censors. The little-known 1945 Swedish newsreel reveals an image that no one outside the Führer's inner circle has ever seen before.
You see Hitler walking. His left hand is hanging limply at his side, but there is a tremor. It's as though he is rotating his hands. And it's very clear and it's very convincing. It is the tremor of Parkinson's disease. There is no question in the mind of any neurologist who saw this that this is Parkinson's disease.
It is a stunning theory. Hitler, the endless promoter of Aryan strength and health, may have been ravaged by an insidious neurological disease. Parkinson's affects part of the brain called the substantia nigra. This region normally produces the neurotransmitter dopamine, which helps govern movement. When Parkinson's disease strikes, it destroys dopamine-producing cells. At first, lack of dopamine causes tremors, then it clouds thinking. Eventually, it results in complete immobility and death. With no treatment available at the time, Parkinson's would slowly but surely cripple Hitler's body and mind. Dr. Lieberman began looking for evidence to back up his theory. He would first try to find Hitler's earliest symptoms of Parkinson's disease and track its course. He gathered 300 hours of film spanning Hitler's life. He examined it chronologically with the eye of a police investigator.
So I began to look at hundreds and hundreds of videotapes of Hitler in the 20s and in the 30s. And what I began to see was before 1932, when you see him, he's gesticulating with both hands.
But after 1932, Hitler hardly moves his left arm, often grasping it with his other hand. To Lieberman's expert eye, it was the first visible sign of Parkinson's disease. Lieberman's footage analysis showed evidence of Parkinson's when Hitler was just 43 years old. While most cases of Parkinson's strike the elderly, some 10% like Hitler's are early onset, affecting those under 50. Hitler's disease raises a mystery. Why haven't others recognized the Führer's fatal illness?
It should have been obvious to everyone. I had read books by people who had been with Hitler. No one had mentioned anything about Parkinson's. So you begin to ask yourself, why?
Dr. Lieberman believes Hitler deliberately hid any signs of his illness from the German public. His censors only released photographs that showed him in a flattering light. To protect his image of Aryan purity, the man who rose to power on the greatness of his speeches was making fewer and fewer public appearances. It was probably around 1940 that Hitler's doctors provided diagnoses for his tremors. At that time, a diagnosis of Parkinson's disease was a death warrant. There were no drugs like L-Dopa to slow the course of deterioration.
When somebody told him that he had Parkinson's disease and it was going to kill him in 3 or 4 years, then he was short of time if he was going to conquer all of Europe as he had promised, including Russia. He had to do it right then.
Hitler now sped up his plans for conquest. He recklessly invaded Russia, foolishly opening up a second front. It would bring Hitler one of his first defeats and mark a turning point in the war. Historians have always wondered why Hitler made such an uncharacteristic move. Some suspect amphetamines, but it's just as likely a seriously ill Hitler may have been trying desperately to outrace his own death. By now, Hitler's fanatical campaign of persecution was in full swing. He was sending millions to the death camps and was euthanizing the sick and the disabled. It is possible that this may in part be sparked by a hatred of his own disease. After years of amphetamine abuse and now suffering the full effects of Parkinson's disease, Hitler was about to make his last fatal military mistake. By 1944, Adolf Hitler was showing the results of years of amphetamine abuse and over 12 years of Parkinson's. He was now 55, but looked 70. Despite the trembling, stumbling, and shuffling, none of his loyal inner circle dared to break the code of silence.
His valet, the servants, the secretaries, Eva Braun, Goebbels, we know, didn't say anything. People who were close to Hitler, who were devoted to him, did not mention his Parkinson's disease.
By now, the neurological effects of Parkinson's were likely to cloud Hitler's judgment. Hitler had become indecisive, he behaved irrationally, and he was about to commit a fatal blunder that would speed up the end of the war. D-Day, June 6, 1944. Allied forces stormed the beaches of France. The assault itself was no surprise, but its location in Normandy was. Hitler had been insisting the attack would come some 240 kilometers away at Calais. He was inflexible and slow to respond, possibly due to his advancing Parkinson's. His generals urged him to send panzer divisions to beat back the invasion. Hitler refused. But by the time he changed his mind, it was too late. The Allies now had a beachhead, and their relentless march to free Europe had begun. The last chapter in Hitler's life began in January 1945. The Russians were a mere 60 kilometers from Berlin. The British were bombing the city by night, and the Americans by day. Much of the great metropolis had been reduced to rubble. Hitler and his entourage retreated to an underground command center in the heart of Berlin. Named the Führer bunker, it was a bomb-proof suite of rooms buried deep beneath the gardens of the chancellery. By now, Hitler was severely ill. In addition to Parkinson's, he'd suffered at least one small stroke. There were signs of brain damage and widespread vascular disease. In a rare moment of rationality, Hitler admitted the situation was hopeless and decided to kill himself. Only now, facing his own death, did he take Eva Braun, his loyal companion of 15 years, as his wife. Like all his other relationships, this one had been sexually ambiguous. It is not known if they ever had sex, and it's unlikely the marriage would have been consummated, as a third of men with Parkinson's are impotent. At 3:30 in the afternoon, the day after the wedding, Hitler made his final move.
Then Hitler and Eva Braun went into his study. He disappeared behind the closed door. And they committed suicide. Or did they? This would be a mystery for years thereafter.
The Soviets rushed to the bunker and claimed to have found Hitler's body. Then they say they didn't. Stalin went as far to say that Hitler had probably escaped, setting in motion a flood of speculation. And yet, 60 years after his death, medical detectives think they know exactly what happened to Hitler's body. Eyewitnesses report that after Hitler shot himself, his body was soaked with petrol and burned for 2.5 hours.
What happens when a body is burned? The heat begins to tear open the skin. The skull can even burst. The fat and the water are also destroyed. The bodies begin to shrink. What they saw was that after the first hour, the bodies were badly charred, and after the second hour, there was nothing left.
No one ever found Hitler's body, not because he escaped, but because all that remained were ashes. Today, medical detectives are gaining a different perspective on Hitler's life. They are not providing any rationalization for his malevolence. Instead, they are helping to unearth previously hidden medical secrets and to shed new light on some of his most disturbing decisions. Hitler's vision of conquest turns so dark that some portray him in mythological terms. But the medical records show that he was not at all mythical. The dictator that many considered the most evil of men met a common fate. Addiction, disease, and suicide.